Okay, welcome to your wavy hair demonstration. So if you can see your grid, like I can still, I can see where I erased. With the kneaded eraser, I'm going to erase in the direction of the hair. And I'm also going to clean up the edge, of like the skin, etc. So I'm going to be careful of my guidelines, but I really try. Okay, good. It's blending in. So you want to kind of, especially if the hair is big in your final draft. And I can still see my highlights. I can still see like where I value mapped. I'm going in the direction of the hair itself. Okay, so that looks better. All right. I kind of do already have guidelines for length and direction, and I have the guidelines for the highlights. And so that's where we are going to start, but we're going to kind of add some highlights and then build up the midtones and then work back into highlights. So a little bit different than maybe how you did your self-portrait. So I'm off padding. I'm going to use a sharpened charcoal pencil, and I'm going to hold it like towards the end. I kind of hold it toward the end is hitting my hand, or in the middle. So you want this to be light, kind of sweeping motions. So even though like her hair, is mid-length, mid-long, I guess you would say, you're still going to do short kind of sweeping motions to get all the layers of the hair, because even if your hair is longer and wavy, not every strand is the same length. Okay, so then where it's lighter, I'm going to add like an extra layer where her highlight is. Okay, so then to fade this out, I'm going to flick up and away from the highlight and down and away from the highlight. Okay. That's just the first layer. You're going to build it up. So remember, you can always add more. You just can't take away. Just be a little careful. Now, all of her kind of frizzy little hairs, I'm not going to add those in there. They're kind of catching the light. But in the areas where it's totally dark and I can see my grid, I am going to add like just a couple, like barely touching the paper lines, just so it kind of looks like hair. All right, so in here, I'm going to add just a couple to connect this wavy curl, which is here, to here. Like I can kind of see it, but there's this gap where it's very kind of nondescript. So I'm going to connect those super gently. So you're definitely going to want to like look at length and direction. So here it's much lighter, but I'm going to fade that up and I'm going to fade it down. And then she has this piece. It catches a little more light. It's like part of that wavy curl. Okay, so that's how I would do the whole hair. I'm going to get down in here where it's a little bit wavier, like how you would do that. Or like what if it like here where it's just fading out of the dark right there? Like how would you do that? Okay, so anywhere where it's the waves, let me scoot this up a little bit, there we go. Anywhere where the waves of hair are coming towards the viewer or curving out, they're gonna pick up some light. So here she has this piece that's kind of bending out. So here where it's lighter, I'm gonna add a little bit more and then just kind of fade it into the chunk. So it looks like it's bending out a little bit. Same thing here, it looks like it's bending or curving out. Oh, that part, a lot of that was cut off. So I would have already like done all this value underneath. So please make sure you shade underneath the hair first, like your clothing or your skin. I actually just realized I didn't finish this. I've been like so busy making all the videos and grading, and grading, and grading, and grading, and grading, and grading. Okay, so I'm putting in some of the highlights that or not highlights, I'm sorry, the lighter parts that I see between the chunks of hair that's actually her skin. Okay. Looks like it's bending out a little bit there. Okay, so anywhere where it's lighter, like here, I'm gonna go back and add another layer, but then I'm gonna flick up into the darkness and down into the darkness to kind of connect. So pull up, like flick up and away. And so it helps make it look more faded and not like where it just starts, like right at the edge of the dark. And she does have a piece that's overlapping. Just be careful when I blend that. Okay, so her hair is quite large on the paper. She has a zoomed in view. If your hair is small, you can use your medium blender. I'm going to use the larger blender. And so you're gonna do, oh sorry, the hair over here, I forgot. So if you have a little piece of hair showing, kind of goes in that direction. So I call it touch blending, where you're not circular blending, you're just kind of touching in the direction that the hair is going. And so I'm using the whole side of the blender. So I'm going to go over the highlight, and then I'm going to use more of the tip of it and pull up into the dark and then down into the dark. So same kind of process for blending. Kind of go over it once and then sweeping motions. So for wavy hair, you probably need about 3 to 4 layers. So the first 2 are just trying to get the value, and then the next 2 are refining, like adding more to the highlights and erasing out darks, and adding more into the highlights and erasing out darks. And then your last layer, you'll add just a tiny bit to the highlights, and then you'll leave it alone. You won't blend anything in your last layer. And go off into your border so it doesn't, sorry you guys can't see that. Like I'm kind of fading down into the border. That way it doesn't look weird. You know, like it doesn't just like stop before the border. Okay, so that was our first pass through. Then with the pencil top eraser, I would sharpen it with your red sharpener, and then you're gonna go back in and you're gonna put in areas that you might have gotten a little bit too much. And so just a little. This is really for like in between the hairs on the highlights, because we're gonna go back and use the kneaded eraser anyway. So this is more for like little strands of hair, like where the charcoal is. I wouldn't really do it like where it's just the black paper, because this sharpener tends to kind of mess up the paper if it's just the sharpener, eraser, sorry. It kind of messes up the paper a little bit. And then you have to do all this sweeping off, whereas with the kneaded eraser, you don't have to do that. So I'm just kind of putting some darker strands back in. So it's adding and subtracting, or pushing and pulling is like what we also call it. So with the kneaded eraser, I'm gonna go back and do the same, except for I'm gonna pinch it and make it flat and pointy. And I'm especially focusing in on the dark. Oh, sorry, you guys can't see that. Sorry. Normally I have you guys yell at me during class, like, we can't see. There's nobody here to yell at me. Okay. All right, I feel like this looks a little harsh. So. All right, next layer. I am just gonna do, I don't want this video to take forever for you guys. Well, you kind of do need to see it all. Okay, that's fine. All right, I'll go fast. Okay, so next layer, another layer on the highlights. Building up, and I'm double checking. I'm looking a little closer this time. That kind of curves a little bit more than what I had. Just like a couple of lighter lines. Okay, so I'm going to flick up into the dark, up and away from the highlight, and then down into the dark. And I'm kind of looking at where it ends, because this is what helps make it look more like chunks of hair. Okay, so then, I feel like that part looks fine. So I'm going to flick up into the dark, down into the lighter part. So I was just looking from far away to make sure I'm not getting too much. Okay. So in here I can still kind of see the grid in the picture. So I'm just going to add like a couple, just a little bit, because we don't want you to look gray, but we also don't want the grid to show because that's very distracting. Okay, so in this part, I think it's getting fairly light, and I'm just going to add where the lightest parts are. Like the parts that are bending out, and flick up into the dark and down into the dark. Okay, there's that piece on top. Okay, so just adding a little. And then this time, if you don't want to, like, if you just want to be more precise with your blending, you could just switch to the smaller blender. So I'm going to blend in that direction, then I'm going to fade up into the dark, down into the dark. And I always kind of blend over my lines every time just to soften them, so it doesn't look like, you know, super strands of gray hair on you guys. Okay. So take your time and do like a good second layer, a good first layer, because then the third and fourth are just a little bit of refining, and you don't, you know, you're not trying to fix like a mess that you've made. Okay, so I'm going to flick up into the dark, down into the dark, over the highlight, up into the dark, down into the dark, over the highlight, up into the dark, down into the dark. So I'm going to kind of go over some of my lines in the direction they're going. So yeah, have my highlight for sure. Okay, where else do I need to blend? Okay, so with a kneaded eraser, I'm going to bring back the darks, and I'm going to kind of leave it a little streaky. So So I'm going to pinch and make it pointy, like a flat kind of a flat edge. Okay. And so I am going to pull some strands of hair back into the highlights, just a little, because you are going to do one more layer on the highlights. Or like in here, I feel like I got too much into the dark, so I'm going to pull some of that away. Any place you feel like you got too light, like take a couple steps back, look at it again. Flattening, flattening. Just want to pull some dark back in down here. So I feel like I got a little too light. And occasionally you're going to want to stretch your eraser. Okay, in my last layer, I would just touch on the highlights again, and I would try to get it to where I don't have to blend. So this still looks a little chunky. Okay, so up here, I'm going to add another layer on my highlights. I'm going to hold my pencil like as far to the end as I can and just do like little flicking motions. So it's more like hair. I'm looking at where there's some, you know, closer together, some further apart. And then I wouldn't blend that. I would just leave it as is. So I would go back and do that everywhere on the hair. Okay, there's wavy hair for you. So make sure you do like 2 good layers. Your third, you're putting back in the darks and popping in some more highlights, blend over it. And then your 4th layer, you're really just pulling out of the darks and putting on the lights and not really blending unless you have to. Okay, good luck.